Good evening, everybody, and welcome to episode 10 of ListenIn with Sunaparanta. Today is a very, very special episode, especially for the founder of Sunaparanta, my father. His photograph of a tiger is behind me. And my love for conservation came largely from him and traveling with him and learning with him. So it's a very special day for all of us who care about conservation and try to convert everybody else that they should also care about this. As we planned a session for International Tiger Day, I was thinking of who would be the best people to address this subject. And luckily, my wish list and my dream list happened to both say yes. So thank you, Belinda and Anish, for being with us today. A bit about both of them. Belinda Wright is the founder and executive director of Wildlife Protection Society of India. She was born in Calcutta and has spent her entire life working in and around wildlife in India and grew up among tigers. Before turning to full-time conservation work in 1994, Belinda was a wildlife photographer and an Emmy Award-winning documentary filmmaker with National Geographic. Since then, she has pioneered investigations into the illegal wildlife trade in the Indian subcontinent, helped expose the tiger trade, and has been instrumental in the arrest of hundreds of wildlife criminals. Belinda is a member of numerous government wildlife committees and has the patience of anyone's dreams. Belinda has received various awards for her work as a conservationist, among them the OBE in 2003 and the Carl Zeiss Wildlife Conservation Award in 2005. Thank you, Belinda, for being with us today.
Thank you.
Dr. Anish Andheria is the president and CEO of the Wildlife Conservation Trust, a not-for-profit working in and around 160 national parks and sanctuaries across 23 states in India. He is a member of several government committees and also has enviable patience, including the National Tiger Conservation Authority, the State Board of Wildlife for Maharashtra, the Executive Committee of the Gujarat State Lion Conservation Society, and the Executive Committee of the Village Social Transformation Program of Maharashtra. He is also a recipient of the Carl Zeiss Conservation Award in 2008. He is a large carnivore biologist with immense knowledge of predator-prey relationships and has contributed to several programs across India and authored books on these subjects. Thank you both so much for being with us today. I'm going to start by asking both of you to tell us a little bit about Project Tiger, which started in 1973, and the strides that we've made since then, which are not necessarily short-term gains, but everything that went into the several decades of work that both of you have put into this project.
The conception of the project was absolutely fantastic. It was, leave the tigers alone, they know what to do, and I still believe that's true. But protect their habitat. So initially, the then Prime Minister, Mrs. Indira Gandhi, asked for, I think it was 5 areas to be, she set up a committee called the Tiger Task Force under Dr. Karan Singh, and my mother was a member of that task force. And she said, okay, find me 5 places where the tiger can do really well. In the end, they declared 9 tiger reserves on the 1st of April, 1972, I think, 73, 72. And then they brought in all these laws and so on. And it was the most ambitious project, wildlife conservation project, the world had ever known. And I think it was fantastically successful, except after about 13 years, when other threats came in, which was the trade in skins and tiger bones, they could not recognize them and couldn't stand up to that.
So I will take on from where Belinda left. That's the first understanding of how the poaching mafia was going after our tigers in mid-80s, early 90s, and around 2004, 2005, we really had one of our iconic tiger reserves called Sariska, which actually was extremely pretty and had a lot of tigers in the 80s. Actually went to lose all tigers. Soon Panna also lost all tigers. And so from the time Project Tiger was launched, The tiger's journey has been really up and down. There have been successes, there have been losses, there have been defeats as well. However, just yesterday, the NTCA, under the chairmanship of Javdekar, announced or released the report of 2018. And you can imagine from the early 1970s and late 60s, when the forest department was looking at pug marks, science has really moved ahead. Dr. Ullas Karant, Raghu Chundawat, all these stalwarts who have played a big role in getting the science of tiger and tiger biology out in the popular media, also in the scientific literature. And today we are looking at an exercise that covered 380,000 square kilometers of tiger habitat. Such huge habitat was camera trapped. There were 26,000 locations on which camera traps were placed. Camera traps are two cameras that take picture of anything that cuts the infrared beam, and the tiger or any other animal or human being that cuts that beam is photographed. In this exercise, 76,000 tiger photos were recovered. And so you can imagine the amount of science, amount of effort that this country has put in. And that, I think, is the reason why India supports 70% of all tigers on earth. And there are 13 tiger range countries, of which India has 70%, which means the remaining 12 countries, and mind you, some of those are massive. China, Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, these are not small countries, and they have large tracts of forest land, which is potential tiger habitat, but you don't have very many tigers out there. So it takes a Herculean task by the government, and also with association, with obviously researchers and a lot of NGOs that have worked. But above all, I think the success of the tiger goes to the communities who share their backyards with these magnificent animals. Definitely, we talk about poaching, we talk about the sensitive areas where both human beings and tigers survive. But if you think there are around 3,000 tigers in India of the age 12 months and above, nearly, I would say, 2/3 of them are obviously exposed to human beings on a daily basis. Despite having that kind of high interface between large carnivores like tigers, and a male tiger can weigh about 230 to 240 kgs, and to have that kind of interaction, and yet to have hardly any human deaths is a very, very big achievement. And that is largely because of the culture of the country. There is dependence on the forest, yet the tolerance of people as far as wildlife and the damage that some of those wild animals can cause to their livelihoods, I think that is the biggest winning point for India. And whenever I go and speak abroad or any other forum, I do, when people talk about conservation, I say, if you really want to see conservation and cutting edge conservation, you need to come to India. If you have not seen tiger conservation in India, then you don't know the conservation that we're talking about. So with this, I must end here. I must just say that yes, the seeds for what we see today were sown in the early 1970s, and there were so many people who have played their part. Some of them are being talked about even now, but there are so many unsung heroes out there. And some of those watchers, some of those forest guards who have known tigers like the back of their palm have actually improved the understanding of many of the researchers out there. I'm sure Belinda will have several stories to narrate where her knowledge about that cat has gone up by interacting with people who we think are uneducated people. So I think the one thing that we must, as researchers and NGOs and government, remember that we have to be humble, and we need to respect the role of the communities even more as we move ahead.
That's wonderful, Anish, and I'm so happy you brought that up, because I would love to transition next into the work that both of you do, which is not just contained to work within the forest, but work around the forest. So close to 100 million people live around national parks in India. And how do you go about beginning the work of conservation with these local communities? How do you get different stakeholders to buy into this vision? Because what may work in one place may not even work 20 kilometers away, given how diverse India is. So how have you tackled these issues, and what have your biggest challenges been? Well, to both of you.
Well, first, I just want to make a couple of comments on what Anish said, because the situation is not rosy. That we have numbers, we have wonderful tiger reserves, we have amazing people and conservationists and so on. But the tiger is still surrounded by threats. And we know, from the two experiences that Anish mentioned, one was Suriska, when the last tiger was seen in August 2004, but it was not accepted by the managers until actually January 2005. And then Panna had all the warning signals from scientists, from journalists, from conservationists, and still lost its tigers. So I think that we have to be quite cautious, because the threats that are present now are. Poaching is still a threat, but I think the biggest threat is the loss of habitat. And it is being eaten. Good, really precious tiger habitat is being eaten away virtually every day. And it's being fragmented, and it's endless. I don't want to be too negative, but I think we really have to fight very hard for every inch of habitat. Without habitat and without connectivity between two tiger habitats, the tiger actually doesn't have a future. We will end up with a whole lot of glorious tiger safaris, and that's not what tiger conservation is all about. That's not what wild species is all about, and not what any of us want. Where local communities are concerned, I've worked with particularly Bega tribals since the 1970s, and still work with the same families, three or four, in one case, 5 generations of the same family. And the knowledge that they had in the 1970s particularly was absolutely extraordinary. They could, it was sort of, it oozed out of them. It wasn't something that they could explain very well, but they were they were masters of interpreting nature around them, but particularly the tiger. And I was saying this the other day, that we probably missed a golden opportunity then of trying to convert those same communities who were also poaching, who were also disturbing tiger habitat, but turning them into quite extraordinary sort of green warriors or tiger protectors, rather than it's a long, complicated issue, but we really need to focus now on getting communities on board, because I don't think poaching is going to be the big issue of the next decade. It's going to be conflict. It's going to be human-wildlife conflict of every sort, and particularly around tiger reserves, where there are a lot of communities that are meat eaters who live around the communities and the tiger reserves. And I think that should be, from a conservation strategy, that should be the most important thing we do. And I know that Anish is doing it. I know there are people in South India doing some wonderful work with that. But we also need the forest department and the government on board. I'm not talking about just handouts and compensation. I'm talking about real commitment, motivation, and awareness, and so that people benefit, the local people benefit from being protectors of the areas, wildlife areas they live next to. And I think that is the most important message that a webinar like this can give out.
Well, there are so many things, and so while I want to include all those, but we have to understand that more than what needs to be done, we need to focus on how it needs to be done, because everybody knows what needs to be done. What we somehow falter is in how we do that. And so I think going ahead, and we are looking at a pandemic right now, and because of it, an economic crisis. This is not just pertaining to India, but we are looking at the global crisis. So there will be cascading effects of that on India as well. And so you can imagine that people have no jobs. There is huge amount of unemployment, and there is young people. So India is 65% 30 less than 35-year old, right? And all these people, a lot of them have gone back into their villages. There is going to be huge amount of pressure on the biodiversity, on the natural resources, the protected areas, and some of our iconic tiger reserves, which are playing a big role in having this this nearly 3,000 tiger number that we hear of. But if you look at existing tiger habitats, that is areas where tigers can live, if there was enough prey there, that is much larger than the protected area network that we have. And so India can easily have about 15,000 tigers. Remember, in early 1900, we talked about 40,000 tigers in India. So obviously there is huge amount of degradation, yet there is enough forest that can hold about 15,000 tigers. So when we have 3,000 and we start celebrating it, I think we have to be conscious that it is still less than 5 times of what the forests of India can hold. Okay, so that's the first thing. And going forward, obviously because of all the unemployment and everything, livelihood of the people who live along these parks, who share their backyard, so to say, with large carnivores, with reptiles, we need to make sure that they earn enough so that they can insulate themselves. A lot of people talk of human-wildlife interactions. The negative interactions are normally called conflict. And I continuously keep saying that it is a perception of conflict. It is not conflict. So all of us, including Belinda, you, your father, Raghu, if we were walking in the forest and we see a tiger, we will not interpret it as conflict. Some of us will reach out to a camera, take a picture. Some of us will just write a poetry on them. However, if you don't know anything about tigers and a tiger is 100 meters away from you, you think that the tiger is there to hunt you. So there is that perception. So that perception of conflict is the biggest challenge that we need to target. How are we going to challenge this? It is or target it. It's not easy unless we make sure that people who share their backyards with tigers, with leopards, with rhinos, with elephants, with sloth bear, earn their livelihoods with professions that come out of that wild animal and not of the dead animal, of the living animal. Right. So obviously poaching happens because people are poor. It's not only, generally poaching is done by communities who have been involved in poaching, but they are ostracized communities. They are not in the mainstream. Nobody even recognizes them. So there is huge amount of apathy towards such communities, and those communities are then used by the international and the national mafia to get to the tiger. And so we need to work on the livelihood piece in a holistic manner. Tourism will definitely play a very big role, but tourism alone cannot solve all the problems. And we keep talking about tiger reserves of Karnataka, tiger reserves of Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan and Maharashtra when it comes to success coming out of tourism. But there are 50 tiger reserves in India. There are more than 880 protected areas of India. We need to see how we can develop tourism models where the money from the tourists goes in the hands of the communities that live in that forest. The first step is that if you are able to do that, then you can start talking about conflict. Currently, what we are doing is trying to solve a problem by looking at the symptom. The cause is that people are poor and they feel ostracized from the mainstream. So we need to work on that. Another challenge that we will have is the issue of balancing conservation of animals and forests with the development that's happening. India will have to develop. We have to support 1.3+ billion people. There have to be jobs. There is no two ways it can be achieved without having without development. However, there is enough science, and science that is being done on tigers, on forests in the last 50 years, as good as any other scientific publication that you can think of has come out of India. There is enough knowledge. We need to see how that science is used to inform policymakers so that all the future developmental projects, and that means linear infrastructure projects, roads, railways, power lines, canals, and mines, they are all planned in a very, very integrated manner so that you can develop as a nation. At the same time, you don't do it at the expense of wildlife. So these two things in my mind are going to be extremely crucial. So this is, I think, a midway. So it's like a pit stop in a big race. So yes, we are refueling. We are very happy. However, as Belinda said, the threats are all there, and there are different threats. So when I think many years ago, threats were different. The technology was not there. Electricity was not there. When India electrifies itself, the electric wires are going to go everywhere. And currently, huge number of animals, not just carnivores but herbivores, are being killed by illegally electrocuting them just by tapping power lines. So you can imagine the new threats. Now there is no proof really, and there could be wires that can run for 3-4 kilometers, and that will kill everything that touches it, from a scorpion to a big elephant. So we need to be very mindful of that. We should celebrate. At the same time, we have to understand that these are new threats, and they have to be tackled by including communities in it. The government alone can protect protected areas, not the vast majority of forests that lie outside protected areas. They have to be protected with the help of communities in very, very innovative ways. And I'm sure we have all the science and understanding of business in place. We need to have the right attitude and the will to do it.
But what I'm finding extraordinary, Anish, is that in some of the issues that have come up in the last 2 or 3 years, when you have a choice of putting a road, a highway, 6-lane highway sometimes, through a wildlife habitat, and there's an alternative, I'm afraid it's the wildlife habitat that loses out every time. And that's something, that's an attitude and a thinking process that we have to somehow try and change. I don't know why that hasn't been possible. We need to have solid reasons.
No, so I think I would think that the onus of to do what you're saying lies on people who are working on the ground. If you provide data, so for instance, I can talk from the Wildlife Conservation Trust's experience, because we work very focused manner in Maharashtra and Madhya Pradesh. There is huge amount of data set. So when we went with the data set to the state government of Maharashtra, where every single road around Tadoba is going to be widened. And so Tadoba is going to be nestled by big 4-lane roads, right? So when we came to know, but because we had done 1.5 years of data was collected, when we went and sat with the principal secretary of PWD, when we sat with the principal secretary of the chief minister, because of our data sets, it took us just 30 minutes to convince that they need to follow guidelines that are being set by WII and use the data that we were having to decide where exactly those mitigation measures will have to come. But see, in corridors, I keep saying it's very difficult to avoid corridors. You can avoid protected areas, because protected areas you can circumvent. Corridors are linear structures, and when you have an east-west moving corridor with a north-south moving linear infrastructure, wherever you move the infrastructure, it's going to cut the corridor some way or the other. So we'll have to have two plans. One is the protected areas should be kept sacrosanct, no new projects. Even the old roads should be maintained the way they are. They need not be widened. But outside, wherever there is no other option but to build infrastructure, we will have to go for scientifically informed mitigation measures. Currently, what we don't have is that kind of knowledge for all our states. We have good knowledge in some states. For instance, in Karnataka, there is good information. In Maharashtra and in Madhya Pradesh, where we are working. But there are so many other corridors, just in the central Indian landscape, Belinda, on the current NTCA, if you look at the map that the WI has come up with, there are 25 to 30 major corridors. But when we started working and we came up with that publication, we actually saw that there are 150 functional corridors in the central India and Eastern Ghat landscape. So first is to look at those areas and include them into your big white paper that the government looks at, and then the project proponents, when they come up with an idea, they will therefore think about the mitigation. Currently, because it is all on the paper, you have 25 to 30 corridors mentioned. Obviously, whenever an NHAI or any PWD is building a road, they don't know that that falls under corridor. And we have seen that the project proponents are always willing to listen to all the existing documents because they don't want delays, because there are so many projects in their hands. So I think we as WCT have succeeded considerably because there is data. So I think the onus of getting these mitigations at the right place lies on people who are working on doing scientific studies. So I think government has shown that if we provide that data, they will use it to improve the situation on the ground.
Well, I wish you, and I wish I could believe you entirely, because all the recent meetings, I mean, if you look at the standing committee of the National Board for Wildlife and their last minutes, it's all about denotification, smallish areas usually. And I think it's important that the people who are listening should understand about corridors. Corridors is not a corridor of forest. Animals don't need that, particularly big cats. They just need to be able to get to a few safe points, and you know, they usually head towards a direction. If there are no safe points in between, then they get into trouble. That's what's required. And then and of course underpasses and things which the PWD and things are quite willing to you know, build. But the protected areas, tiger reserves, must remain sacrosanct for anything and everything.
Completely.
And that's a message that has not really got through.
Anish, I know you, Anish, you have this great analogy of how national reserves or national parks can't necessarily exist like islands. They must be, you know, you can have 50 great islands, but if they can't be connected, there's almost no point. Could you explain a little bit about animal corridors and why island-like parks might not be the best idea for people who are approaching this for the first time?
Yeah, so I will try and explain it in a very simple way. Think about islands. So if you were in a place like West Indies or in Indonesia, where there were many islands, thousands of islands actually, if you go to Indonesia. So they all, when you're on the island, it looks very healthy. But if you look at the number of species found on those islands, then there is a very clear-cut trend that you see. All those islands which are very close to the mainland have higher biodiversity than those islands which are more oceanic. And when you talk of biodiversity, we obviously, animals, mammals especially, are not going to be able to swim hundreds of kilometers in the sea. So the biodiversity will be those that evolved on it or those that could migrate into it. Now birds are able to do it easily, and some of the marine species are able to do, especially iguanas and all that. However, on land, when you so think of India 300 years ago, it was all forest, and the villages were islands because they were all discontinuous, sitting within a big carpet of forest. Now, as we are, that thing has completely changed, which means now you have a sea of human habitation, and the forest is discontinuous like the way the villages were. So like in the past, those villages were connected through roads. People used to walk or go in a bullock cart from one village to another. Animals will have to also do that, because first of all, if an island is big, which means if the park is big, it is far more better than a smaller park, which means the extinction rates of species is much higher in a smaller park than a bigger park. First. Second, how close is that park from another park so that animals can move in and out? Third, what is the quality of the corridor between these two islands? Islands, when I say, think about them as parks. For instance, Kana, which is to the northeast of Pench, there is a corridor in between. But if you remove the corridor, they are two isolated islands. because there is corridor, Kana Pench tiger population is virtually considered as one population. And that is what makes that population extremely robust. Because if you look at the NTCA studies also in the past, that they say that you need at least 100 adult tigers in one population and at least 20 breeding females in that population for that population to remain stable over a 100-year period. Now, when I say that, stable meaning stable from low levels of poaching and some amount of forest degradation, grazing, fire, and all that. So all those detrimental issues that population can withstand if that population has 20 breeding females. Most of our parks are so small that you don't have 20 breeding females or 100 individual in that one population. For instance, Tadoba alone, which is considered to be one of the better parks in terms of tiger density, doesn't meet that criteria. So for Tadoba to exist, you need Tadoba to be connected to Nagzira Navegaon or to have a big forest around it so that that criteria is fulfilled. So what corridors allows us is, even if the population is small, because there is this linkage, you can look at that population as one, which means you add 60 tigers of one park to the 60 tigers of another park, which is maybe 50-60 kilometers away, but connected through a good structural corridor, which means there is forest. Tigers do use other non-forest areas in the night as well, but to start with, you need to have the forest. Around it, there are farmlands and rivers and all, which tigers will use. But that is extremely, extremely important. So if you want tiger populations in a place to survive in a whole landscape, you need to have a network of corridors connecting all these parks, so that if in one forest, because of excessive poaching or because of disease, the population comes down, through natural processes, tigers will disperse and reoccupy that area. So that is why the science of corridor becomes extremely important as we move on, because we are now in a very different situation than how we started 300 years ago.
But Anish, can I ask, why is mining, and it's just been, more permission has been given, allowed in the very chicken neck of the corridor between Kana and Pench?
What happens is that currently the way the corridor has been defined is the least cost path, which means it's the shortest path between two parks. But you know, and a lot of tiger biologists who have studied tigers will understand that tigers go in a direction, but it is a very erratic and lot of random electron-like movement. So when you reduce a corridor to a thin line, which is the least cost path that the tiger will take, like a crow flies, that is not how the tiger walks. So you cannot have just a 1 kilometer wide corridor, which is 100 kilometers long, and expect the tiger to reach from point A to point B without a problem. But because the corridors are so narrow on the way they are described, mining, all that comes in, because those areas which are actually corridors from the ecology point of view are not currently called corridors. So we need to first redefine the way the corridors are defined currently in our law books. Once we do that, then I'm sure there will be enough power, and the law in India is pretty robust. We need to give power in the hand of law through proper data on maps, and all the GIS work that one does will help improve the definition of corridors. And once we define that correctly, I'm sure we will be able to, because you can see in several parks where that have been done, big dams have been stopped. The roads have been diverted just because there was proper. So for instance, every tiger reserve has a tiger conservation plan. It is called the TCP. In the TCP, they decide how the tiger reserve needs to be managed. Now, NTCA, few years back, almost half a decade back, they said that the TCP of a tiger reserve should also include how you will manage the corridor. At that point in time, each and every state forest department was asked to map those corridors that radiate out of that tiger reserve. And in areas that we have worked, I can talk about. So in Madhya Pradesh and Maharashtra, all those areas that we were camera trapping and we found corridors in, we went all the way up to the compartment level, and those compartments were included in the TCP. Once it is part of the TCP, then it becomes extremely powerful document to be able to stop. So the first thing is to make sure that all of our TCPs have reflect what you see on the ground level. So that we need to do, and definitely Kana Pinch corridor, if you see, go to any of the maps that are being used, it's just one thin line connecting two parts. That's not how the corridor is. In fact, the corridor between Kana Pinch tiger reserves is actually the breeding areas for tigers. From our study, we know that there are at least 15 to 20 adults who live in that corridor. They have been there for the last 10, 12 years. So they are not animals who are walking back and forth. They are like using that area like their own home range. So we need to also understand that.
Two things if we could just talk about before. One, today when you read the newspaper on International Tiger Day, there's a lot of talk about carrying capacity. And oh, this park has a carrying capacity of 39 or somebody else has a 41. What do these numbers mean to a layperson? And secondly, if the tiger numbers are increasing, does that mean that poaching is decreasing?
Well, to first answer the first part of the question with numbers, we have quite set, people have quite set ideas in their head about tiger behavior and so on. But if you look at the old literature, and for instance, let's talk about a Corbett story where he was sitting in a tree, that the beaters came through and 7 adult tigers walked out. So I think tigers we don't know everything. I think in brief, we don't know everything there is to know about tigers. We know that adults, they may be closely related, but there's evidence of adults sharing kills and adults moving together, not just because of female is an estrus. So I think I think carrying capacity is not something that we know definitively at all. And a lot of it depends on water, vegetation, prey species, disturbance levels, and things like that. Well, the poaching scenario at the moment is rather strange. The big organized poaching that developed in the late 90s. Before that, it was fairly haphazard. But those big networks with the sort of the equivalent of dons, that doesn't exist like it used to. It's in the hands of a few very capable people, but they don't stockpile anymore. A lot of this is thanks to enforcement, thanks to a lot of good cases that happened. But it's also to do with they've worked out that life is a little bit easier if they stick with wood smuggling or drugs or pangolin or pangolins. That there's too much focus now within the citizens as a whole, but within the enforcement community on tiger crimes. So those people have stepped back, but what's happening, that a lot of the poaching now of big cats is by local poachers. Some of it is just from electrocution traps. They've put out traps for bushmeat, for herbivores, and big cats with their soft pads get very easily electrocuted. Sometimes they just remove the canines and the claws and leave the rest. So it's very different to what it was. The demand is still there in China, but China also has, thousands and thousands of tigers in tiger farms. So we're still seeing fairly organized poaching in northern India, but not in central India. And some of the gangs that were operating in central India are now operating in South India and the Northeast. I mean, that's just a general picture. But it's very, very different from what it is. And like most criminal activities, things will change. And there's quite a lot of change that we're seeing now.
See, carrying capacity, as Belinda has mentioned, depends on several factors. So it's just not it's forest quality, how many villages are there, what is the kind of mosaic of landscape that we're talking about, means very good forest with farmlands or just contiguous big forest, what is the prey, what is the poaching pressure. So a lot of things are there. When you reduce anything to a number, then a very subjective thing you are trying to, it's a reductionism principle that you're playing. When you start talking carrying capacity, you're basically saying first that all your parks are not open, which means it is a zoo, which is not true. So I can talk of carrying capacity in a cage because it's enclosed. Tigers are highly dispersing animals, and not just tigers, birds, a lot of other species. So when a population is open, animals, where if they cannot find enough food, mate, or denning site within that population, will disperse. So that never happen. It's not like Bombay where you have more people coming in and you can build skyscrapers and you can accommodate all those people. In the forest, the game is very simple. So tigers in a park, tigers, if you protect the park well, and protection is damn important of the protected areas, you will have a average fixed amount of tigers on an average in a certain park. Any additional animal will automatically be driven out, or will be, if it is not capable of fighting, it will die. So animal populations will regulate itself. The word carrying capacity comes when you are trying to use these kind of jargons to fix a number of tigers, and then you may start saying that we will need a safari. So any extra tiger cannot be accommodated within a tiger reserve, can go into a safari, or you can say that there is one extra tiger there and we need to remove it, and that we will just put somewhere else. That is done in a lot of countries in Africa, where they are all in big parks which are game reserves, where they keep counting. And because there lot of not all the African countries, but several countries where hunting is allowed, and people make money out of that. When you do that, obviously you will say there is extra number of animals that you will remove. Now that same principle cannot be applied to India, because India does conservation in a very different manner. So this carrying capacity, most scientists who understand science, there are a lot of scientists who don't understand science. So all those scientists who understand science will never use something, a word like this, because it is scary, because that can keep changing so if there are 4 years of drought, the amount of wildlife that exists in a certain landscape will drop. So are you going to say that now the population is substandard and you will bring more animals from outside? No. If you protect that park well, animals will take care of itself. Tigers have survived thanks to the government and the communities, but tigers also breed profusely, and because of their biology, they have been able to withstand the amount of pressure that has been thrown on tigers. Just for statistics, from 1875 to 1925, more than 150,000 tigers were hunted down in India in 50 years. But tigers have still survived all that onslaught because their biology is right. So that's one thing. And then I think Belinda is the best person to answer the other question which she has done. So I don't want to delve into that part.
Let me move to the audience questions then. The first one coming from Beverly Joubert. Beverly, we're so happy that you're joining us. You are a force in conservation yourself. She asks, can you talk to the threat or situation where there are more tigers in captivity, even in private homes around the world, especially China and the USA, than the wild in India? Is it worth a media campaign to counter this? And could you speak to the abuse of tigers in farms as well?
Happily. The first message we have to get across, because it's used as a kind of tool by people who have so-called tiger sanctuaries in the US and even these tiger farms, is that captive tigers bred in captivity have nothing whatsoever to do with tiger conservation. The tiger farms that I've been to in China, they're all hybrids. Some of them are blind. Some of them got little stump tails. They are nothing to do with wild tigers and wild tiger conservation. People and the US authorities should be ashamed that they've allowed something like 12,000 tigers in captivity, usually under the banner of conservation. and the abuse of tigers, which is, you know, so obvious. I mean, they've got them in little cages beside the road, and that the ghastly TV series, Tiger King, that was on recently, there was no focus on that film on the abuse of it, taking tiger cubs away from their mothers, you know, so that they could be cuddled, and you know, cutting their claws, removing their claws in many places, and sawing down their teeth. I think there are, Beverly, I think there are campaigns for this. And I'm afraid I really have to focus on India and wild tigers here. But I think Wild Aid and other people are doing amazing campaigns in China, and other people are campaigning in America. But I think it's absolutely shocking that, you know, that there are so many, far many, I mean, many times more tigers in captivity than there are in the wild. And they're beautiful animals, and not everybody in the world can come and see them in the wild, because then there'd be no space for tigers. But it's pretty shocking.
However, I'm going to move, actually, since we've been talking a lot about central India. Anish, there's a question about Assam. And with the floods there, there's, you know, been a lot of repercussion on the local terrain and the local wildlife. So what steps can be made to mitigate such damage, or is it just, you know, the coast?
So first of all, we must know that the area that we talk of is called the floodplains. So it is supposed to be flooded. It does get flooded every year. It is not a one-off. It has been flooding for millions of years. Yeah. So that's something that is going to happen next year as well. The problem of flooding, it's not the flooding that is of any problem. The problem is that Kaziranga has got isolated from other areas, and you have large district like Karbi Anglong. So it is a district which is the most forested district, mountainous district of Assam, that is abutting Kaziranga. However, because of illegal quarrying that goes on along the hills, there is, you cannot imagine how many. On top of it, there are tea estates, then you have human habitation, and you have the highway, the National Highway 34, that is actually, when you build a highway, it is elevated. So when roads are built, you will see in your city as well, every time a road is relaid, the height of the road goes up. So when you do that, you are creating a dam. So actually the flood waters are accumulating for longer periods because of human interventions in that habitat. So the flood per se is a good thing for Kaziranga because it enriches the soil. The problem is where the connectivity lies. So we need to somehow improve the connectivity, which means underpasses for animals so that they can move to Karbi Anglong. Illegal quarrying has to stop. All those businesses that are run in that area, there has to be a policy so that walls or fences cannot be erected in certain areas, because we are not talking about tigers alone. The more vulnerable species out there are the rhinos and the elephants, and for their movement, it is very, very important that all the obstacles are removed from there. There are multiple obstacles. The similar thing has happened between Corbett and Rajaji. In fact, West Rajaji and East Rajaji. East Rajaji is smaller. The Rajaji side, which is closer to Corbett, is smaller than the West Rajaji. However, you have lot of tigers in East Rajaji because they still come in from Corbett, and that population is one. But between West and East, because there are roads, there are canals, there are ammunition dumps, there are railway lines, Rajaji Tiger Reserve is actually split into two. And as a result, now the government is undertaking a translocation program of tigers to populate one side of Rajaji. So it's all visible. So it's not just Assam. Anywhere you go, the principles are simple to understand, and it needs to be implemented in a methodical way. So the first thing is to build underpasses on that highway, not in one area, but multiple areas, and get the quarrying under control, because otherwise you will have this problem of the flood. The flood is not at fault. Human beings are.
And I have to add, whoever asked that question, in the 1970s, that highway was a little track, and the government of India gave a huge amount of money to build a road, a separate road round it, so that the oil refinery could use that road. And it was never done. There wasn't a single structure on that road, not one. And the animals, they used to close the road at night, and you could just sit there, and the animals would be like the ark, you know, they'd just be walking across the road. And now it's just for houses. I mean, you wouldn't recognize it. So the chance was there, and so we must take chances now and make sure we don't do the wrong thing now, because this problem would not exist if people had really taken that action then.
I'm going to move to Karnataka actually with a question from Jayant Sharma. Karnataka's recent land reforms now allow non-agricultural individuals and companies to buy agricultural land. What will be the repercussions on wildlife habitats? Would it help if large organizations buy land to rewild it and maybe create a corridor or a buffer area?
It's a difficult one. It will work in certain areas, but it cannot be copy-pasted everywhere. Wherever there is local community buy-in, if there is land that is owned by the community, and if the community is roped in and they are willing to allow wildlife on it, that is always a good option, because there is that natural attachment to land. In certain areas where it doesn't work, obviously we can go to a route where it can be bought by people. However, remember, humans are humans. The problems are not of a certain community or a certain class of people or that. It is about our ability to destroy things. So today we might say that the farms are the ones, or the agricultural land are causing problems. Tomorrow, if you give it to private, and if it is not regulated well, then you may start having night safaris, you may have a lot of things out there which cannot be regulated. So we must, going forward, experiment these things. So before we pass it as a law, we must see if there is any successful program possible on the ground first. So rather than writing a policy and then trying to see whether the policy is working on the ground or not, it is important that we try it out. Definitely we cannot throw anything out of the window, because tiger numbers are not the indicator of the issues that the tigers are facing. The numbers have gone up, but the number of square kilometers of tiger habitat has constantly gone down. So it is the success coming out of few states and few good, well protected tiger reserves. But overall, the overall tiger habitat has only gone down. And so we'll have to try those in certain areas, case by case, not come up with a policy at the state or a national level and then try to correct it, because it looks very simple, it is not.
I'm going to move to Gujarat now with a question relating to both of your comments on the carrying capacity. Is it not that Gir is overpopulated and that is a health danger to the lions within? I know it's about Tiger Day, but we're moving to lions. The self-regulating mechanism for population does not seem to have worked for the lions. Could you comment on that?
So again, self-regulation, when we talk, we have to understand that lions are very different from tigers. A lot of their diet is coming from livestock, cattle, buffaloes. So outside Gir has about 30 to 40% of all lions. The remaining 60% of lions, or at least 50% of lions, are outside Gir. So the area of Gir National Park and Sanctuary together is 1,400 plus square kilometers. But lions currently occupy more than 21,000 square kilometers in Gujarat. And now a lot of that habitat is actually not ideal lion habitat. But because of the culture there, people don't retaliate so much when cattle or buffalo is lifted, is why this pride-loving animal species has survived. Now, while we can talk very highly of it, one must understand that this is like a time bomb. The moment economy fails, which is right now because of the pandemic, you may have a huge issue with debts going up and overall livelihoods under threat. that kind of a situation can suddenly, in no time, change the way people perceive a large carnivore in their backyard. So carrying capacity, again, if lions are allowed to do what they do, the lion population will go down, because lions in a lot of these areas are being baited, the populations of lions are being have survived. But if they are forced to live on wild prey, you will see that the population of lions in Gujarat will drop. So carrying capacity cannot be looked at where you are supplementing populations through domestic animals. So currently in Gujarat, inside Gir also, there are a lot of nesses and there are a lot of Maldharis. And if you look at the diet profile of lions, there is huge amount of biomass that comes from buffalo and cow that exists inside Gir.
Okay, we're going to move back to central India. Belinda, this one's for you. You spoke about how tigers vanished from Siriska and Panna, and we also have a very heartening and, dare I say, unparalleled story of reintroduction of the tiger in Panna. Today, there are 42 tigers in Panna. Would you consider this a success story that needs to be recognized and?
I think it's absolutely, incredible, that's incredibly successful, but it's not going to work everywhere. I think Panna was very well planned. The animals were protected. It was a great prestige issue, but it hasn't worked so well, for instance, in Siriska, and certainly not in Mukundra Hills. But I think that repopulating a tiger reserve is not something we should sit back and say, oh, well, if the tigers all go in that tiger reserve, we can repopulate it, or even when we're talking about other countries. But I think that, my hat's off to all the people involved in Panna. But my heart still breaks for the original tigers of Panna, that this should not have happened.
And also the fact that there was enough evidence
Yes.
that was provided, so it could have been. We could have woken up much earlier, and we wouldn't have lost all tigers if the evidence was recognized.
You can't solve a problem if you don't recognize the problem, if you don't admit to the problem, or whatever the word is. Yeah.
When you work with the government, and if you want to do tiger conservation or any conservation in India, you cannot keep the elephant outside the room. The elephant in the room is the way the government is going to manage. An NGO or an individual doesn't manage the forest. It is managed by the grassroots level workers, by the watchers, by the forest guards. And while people I have seen over years taking credit for conservation, I think we as people who work in the space are the icing on the cake. The cake is controlled by the government. So it depends on this relationship that you have with the government. Plus, I completely disagree that I was talking about the government in a positive light. I have said what my science has shown me. So I don't take sides. I'm a scientist. I allow science to speak.
Okay, we're going to move further north, actually, with a question that came in over email. In view of the recent cases of man-tiger conflict in and around Dudhwa National Park, especially the tigers taking refuge in the sugarcane fields, even the forest department is resorting to using caged tractors. What is the alternative to this kind of onslaught of, I guess, conflict, or what are the mitigation tactics that could be employed?
It's been happening for years and years and years in Dudhwa. And sugarcane, the first thing is that sugarcane fields are absolutely perfect habitat, or they think so anyway, for big cats. Whether they're tigers, leopards, they love to live in sugarcane. And so that's the first thing, is to look at why why these problems are happening, what's helping to create this problem. Dudhwa has always had a complicated, for a long time, I think since the 60s and 70s, with man-eating tigers and with this sugarcane issue. It's a huge sugarcane belt. So it's a big management issues that requires some difficult political decisions. and farmers to come on board and change their farming habits.
If you see Dudhwa,
Hmm.
it is actually a fragmented tiger reserve.
Hmm.
So Dudhwa is not Dudhwa National Park. It is Kishanpur and Katarnia Ghat together, and they are not connected to each other. So they used to be a huge amount of forest around that area has been converted into sugarcane cultivation, and sugarcane is an excellent habitat for littering, for leopards at least, and tigers can also hide there easily. So you are basically baiting animals, because in summer and times where Dudhwa becomes difficult, you have ready water and cover everywhere. So you're creating that kind of cover, and that is what is drawing animals out. A, you are fragmenting that landscape further, and second, you are providing an alternative habitat where you get dogs and cats as fast food. It's like going to a fast food center and eating things. So Dudhwa, in fact, is why the organization like us are working in Central India, so that Central India doesn't go the Dudhwa way. And I'm sure everybody who is on this call, and if they have gone to Dudhwa, there is no forest in India that is more beautiful than Dudhwa National Park. If you really go there, if you go to Katarnia Ghat, the cane forest of Katarnia Ghat, which is abutting forest of Nepal, it is probably the most impregnable looking and the most beautiful forest that you can think of. So it actually, my heart cries whenever I think about that habitat. It's an ideal habitat for all kinds of wildlife in the tropical area. Yet today it is reeling under these kind of pressures. It's largely because of the way the land use has gone wrong in that area.
And also borders Nepal.
Yeah.
And interestingly, Anish, the first tiger bone case I have ever come across was in 1986 in Dudhwa. Interesting. First case in India.
We're going to move next to Satpura, actually, and somebody is asking, what is your opinion about using the Forest Land Diversion Compensatory Fund to resettle villages inside the project areas to places outside? There have been some very successful experiences in Satpura, and could this be promoted and enabled on a larger scale?
The camper funds are absolutely huge. I think Anish has more to do with their use than I do. But if the camper funds can be used for really solid, good conservation measures, then that would be really wonderful. But anyway, Anish, how would you comment on the Satpura situation?
Yeah, it's a very, very good question. First of all, I want to place in front of everybody that Campa Fund, people have to understand what is Campa Fund. Campa Fund is money that is collected from project proponents who are responsible for diverting forest for non-forest use.
Yeah.
So while that amount looks big, remember that every single rupee that is collected was basically collected by liquidating that green infrastructure. So green infrastructure converted into anthropogenic infrastructure. So that money is not, so while it looks big, you know how it is being collected. Now, once that money has come in, currently, a lot of that money, there are two components to it. That is afforestation and there is NPV part to it. There are very strict guidelines as to how that money can be used. A lot of it, and a lot of states currently are utilizing money for afforestation work, which is plantation work. Now, most of conservationists and people who work with biodiversity, not only tigers, with anything, even if it's insect, they will all say that if there is land, we must go for natural regeneration only. No plantation inside forest land. If you have species, birds, mammals, they will do the work of dispersion. In that way, they will disperse the seeds in the right proportion so that the forest looks like the forest that's there around it. When you do plantation, A, it is energy intensive, B, money intensive, C, the mortality of trees is so high that you can keep planting in the same hectare forest for 20 years. Every year you can plant 1,000 trees, and then they will not be there, because the problems of degradation we have to understand. Again, the problem, the cause is grazing, man-made fires and removal of fuel wood. Now those problems exist. In fact, it is increasing year by year. You are trying to replace that forest which is going at such a high pace by a soft activity like forceful plantation of 2 or 3 species of plants. That is not the way to do it. So this question I can answer in a long way, but the short thing is, therefore, this money, if used for translocating people who are willing to move out of either a core or the buffer zone or the corridor, is a better usage from whatever they are using it currently for. So I'm not saying that you collect more money so that you can get more people out. No, whatever money is there, utilize. You should not have the Campa fund. Every state should say that I don't have hardly any money, because that means that the forest was not converted from forest to non-forest. That is first thing. Whatever has been collected historically has to be utilized. And over years, as a conservationist, I have seen that whatever you do, if it is not within the protection realm of the forest department, that area will be like a drain and a recurring issue. So you can put Campa money, but that will require be replenished every few years. But if you have a well-protected park and you have a village in the middle of it, and if that village agrees and wants to go out, that is the best use of the Campa money that exists with the states. So that is one thing that one has to remember. Till about last year, Campa money was with the center. Now the Campa money has been distributed to the states, and the states now have the ability to use that money. So they have reduced the number of steps involved, but some of the very progressive states who have done great work in conservation are using the Campa money where it should be. But because there is big money now with several states, I am very worried that in no time, within 5 or 6 years, their Campa funds will be utilized for afforestation drives or for things which are not going to bring back the forest that was liquidated to collect that money. So that's where my thing is. So definitely translocation of people who are willing to move is an ideal way of using the money. But I would be happy the day the state says that we have no Campa money because we don't allow any forest diversion.
One last geographical question for India, at least, is that what do you suggest a state like Goa does for their tiger population, which is very small but exists? They see them every now and then. So what would a smaller state with limited resources do about that? Should they be moved elsewhere, or what can be done?
But I think wherever tigers, tigers chose to go there. Nobody brought them there on a lead and said, okay, live in Goa. So I think that Goa should celebrate that they have tigers and find a way of increasing their habitat, not decreasing them by putting a road through their habitat and by mining and moving coal from one place to another and disturbing the whole thing. I think it's a huge thing for Goa to celebrate, from governor downwards. And I hope they manage to succeed in looking after their guests, their striped guests, and having the population multiply there.
So yeah, so basically, Goa is a very interesting place because I come from Maharashtra. The overall forest cover in Maharashtra is very low compared to what Goa has. So Goa, I would say, is how a state like Maharashtra or a state like Gujarat would have been 70, 80, 90 years ago. So one good thing about Goa is that they still have forests. Another good thing about Goa is that they have a lot of protected areas, and many of them are connected with each other. The third positive thing about Goa is that Goa's forests are connected to both forests in Maharashtra and forests of Karnataka. So they have all these things in place, which means there will be movement of animals, tigers from Anshi Dandeli into Goa at a regular pace. So Goa currently is doing well in terms of having these protected area network, but I would say that they are not doing enough to safeguard large mammals. And large mammals are holding that position in terms of conservation because it is difficult to conserve large mammals. You can conserve snakes, you can conserve frogs, you can conserve insects, but large mammals are difficult. So Goa needs to now take the difficult route, which means allow the tiger to show them how to consolidate their conservation plans so that these small parks can be looked at as one. So for tigers, the first thing Goa has to do is create a plan which is of a contiguous nature across all their connected parks. They should look at that as one tiger habitat, first of all. Second, Goa is currently developing at a very fast rate because Goa, as I told you, is still green. There is, if you look at the percentage of forest cover, Goa can always say that look at other states, they hardly have in forest, we have more than double their forest. So we will do whatever we have to because we have to also develop. So currently Goa is developing at a pace which is much faster than many other states, including Maharashtra. And so if you consolidate that conservation plan, you will start looking at it as one, and then you will have ways of mitigating all the linear infrastructure that is coming. I have been going to Goa for either some conservation activity or some work or meeting some friends there. I have seen that every single time I go there, I see more roads that I saw a year back. And so that's going to happen. We need to first, instead of looking at parks in isolation, if we include that, you have a plan, you take science that people have done in other states and do a landscape level planning, which a lot of states have not done. So Goa actually can be a great example for multi-sectorial landscape level planning, which will work for win-win on both sides. Currently, I'm afraid the way the highways are cutting through some of the protected areas, it is going to fragment already smaller parks into much smaller parks. Then tigers are a strict bye-bye because tigers are like the barometers. If you don't have contiguous places and the denning site for the tigress, forget the male tiger, the female tiger, if she feels unhappy because of something, she is going to leave Goa and go. So rather than celebrating tiger photos every year that we have one tiger, two tiger, no. It is telling you that your habitat is good enough, but not good enough to allow the tigress to make it her own home. You saw that a family of tigers was poisoned in Goa, and that case, I'm sure, is still going on. So something like that should not happen there. One thing that Goa needs to do, and that I have seen, is that there is huge amount of hunting that goes on for sport still in a lot of these parks, and that needs to stop because snakes can survive that, but tigers will not, because tigers need food and hunters go after barking deer, they go after sambar, they go after pigs, and that tigers cannot tolerate. So tigers are in Goa. So if Goa was isolated from Karnataka and Maharashtra, Goa would not have had tigers there. Goa has tigers because it is connected with very, very good quality forest in Karnataka. So we must not take it for granted.
I'm going to move next to, there are a few different questions, so I'll combine them. One is that how do we incentivize the political elite or the policy makers to make wildlife conservation a priority for them? How would India use its tiger soft power? And thirdly is that, there's a lot of talk right now with the environmental assessment study and kind of how to ensure that development is not happening at the expense of conservation at large.
So I've spent the best part of my life trying to influence policy. So if whoever asked that question has any good ideas, no, but seriously, if you want to influence policy, get your facts right, get your details correct. Don't just shout and bark and whatever. The only thing that'll work influencing policy is good information and a well-researched argument. And that's true with a lot of things, but a very good question.
Yeah, so I think first is good quality science. Second is not compromising once you have that science in your hand. which
Yeah.
means people who have the science should allow that science to speak for itself and not dilute it because it doesn't work the way it is. So we should not compromise whether you are an NGO or a government body involved in scientific studies. What the grassroots level works tells you is what should be presented.
Yeah.
Policymakers, as I have already given you an example, listen to quality science because it's irrefutable. Okay, so not compromising on science is one way. Second is to make sure that when there are public dialogues, which the government is asking currently on the EIA, Environment Impact Assessment, and various other policies, when government asks us to comment on those, we must not sit quietly. We must send our representations, because eventually we need conservation can work if there is it is unambiguous, if the laws are what they should be. That ambiguity that exists is because we are still using archaic laws, and the government is trying its to allow people to speak. However, we have to make sure that we use not just the conservationist for writing this. I can tell you as a conservationist that my vote weighs much less than the vote of the farmer.
Yeah.
So conservationists have to understand that the communities have to be represented in all these discussions. There is no two way about it. You need to get the communities to speak, and if the vote bank speaks, no politician or policymaker is going to ignore it. And conservationists can be called as an impediment to growth, but the communities, when they demand something about their own backyards, everybody will try and see that they get what they want. So it has to be a game like a team where everybody who is breathing oxygen, drinking water, and eating food comes together without and throw all their conflict of interest out there, because we are right now trying to talk about natural resources who on their own cannot communicate to us. They can communicate to us through natural tragedies and erratic weather behavior, but it's not enough, as you can see. So we need to all come together and allow science to guide us. I'm sure I'm very optimistic person, but not that my optimism has always resulted in positive outcomes, but I will continue to be, because one has to be constructive. And as conservationists, we are trained through many defeats to survive those and get up next day morning and do the same thing with integrity. That is what we need to all do. I think then policymakers will definitely listen to us.
Okay, I'm going to move on to a question from Dr. Bharucha from Pune and combine that with one from Gargi Rawat, who we all know as well. Do you think conservation has become more challenging today? And going forward, what are the greatest challenges in the future of management of tiger habitat?
I think it has become a bigger challenge because I don't think, for whatever reason, some of the senior political brains are listening. Maybe it's because that there are no senior leaders who have a special interest in nature or wildlife. But I think that's probably one of the biggest problems at the moment. I mean, I've been all my life I've been involved in this, so it's an awfully long time. And somehow through the years there was always somebody who was in a powerful position that was willing to listen. And that's my sort of greatest regret at the time we're going through now. Where people who put wildlife first, who put nature first, who put fresh air and blue skies first.
We're going to move to a question which just in the to preserve time, which talks about could India ever kind of use the Africa model of private concessions? And do you think that would ever bolster tourism here and also maintenance of habitats? And along with that, kind of follow the model of either the Grumeti bordering the Serengeti or the conservancies bordering the Masai Mara, or say the Sabi Sands and its dependency or border sharing with the Kruger Park? Do you think we would be able to do something like that?
I would say that the models that were listed there have been successful, and therefore definitely there is a case for conservancy. However, we have to understand that several countries within Africa, when you compare them with India, the biggest difference is the population size. So the current scenario in India is that if you are looking at 1,000-hectare patch, which is relatively good forest, but also has people in it, you are probably looking at 2,000 families there. So when you are trying to work on conservancies, I'm talking about generically, there are definitely areas like the coffee plantations, and there are certain forests which are low density. For instance, the Kana Pench corridor in certain patches is very good quality forest. The Rukhad area, right now it is part of the Tiger Reserve, but there is some area on the east of Rukhad which is very good quality with very few people. So it will work in certain areas, especially I would say the conservancy model will work beautifully well in places like Ladakh, in places like Kashmir, in places in Northeast India, because there in Northeast India, uniquely, the land, majority of it belongs to the community. And so there they have control over land, which is very important. Once they have that, then you can start talking to communities, and they also have large land holdings and they are relatively low density. So you have to compare success stories of Africa, not with India as a whole, but in some parts of India, and that definitely will work. So for instance, if you're looking at parks like Kanha, or you're looking at parks like Tadoba, which are very good areas for tigers and other wildlife, but around it, if you look at the land holding, it is wherever there is people, it's very high density. There are huge amount of tourism properties that have come up along the corridor. So there are issues. So we should break down the country and try and implement. The snow leopard country is perfect because there the communities don't have very injurious lifestyles. They are still low density. The areas are vast. So we should not just look at tigers, but this kind of effort can happen and help us protect the non-tiger habitats, which all of us forget. On the Global Tiger Day, we are talking about tigers, but India is not about tiger forests alone. You have Trans-Himalayas, you have areas which are desert-like. If you go to Rajasthan, Gujarat, there are so many birds like the Great Indian Bustard, the lesser florican. Then you have the brown bear, you have snow leopards, you have so many things where tigers don't live. But these models can be used for such charismatic species as well. And I'm sure it will work, but you can't copy paste because there is a lot of difference in the way the densities of people are and the way the land holdings are.
I think it's possible to do it an Indian way, as it were. And people forget that India has the longest wildlife conservation history of any country in the world. 3,250 years, the first protected areas, first forest guards. Anyway, yeah, it's possible.
If you could talk, both of you could talk a little bit about the leopard status in India and why the leopard is not accorded any more importance rather than the tiger, especially with the increase in tiger populations within protected areas. Leopard populations are being pushed out and man-animal conflict is increasing. What are your views on this and why the leopard is not given?
Well, the leopard's character is different from the tiger. The tiger is a loner, generally avoids people. Leopards can live right alongside, human habitation. They're a lot more cunning, a lot more. They're very different characters from tigers. So that brings them into close proximity with people, and they create a lot of fear. I've lived in very close proximity to wild leopards and had some pretty nasty experiences living in villages and things. And they are a very frightening presence. They're so smart, so clever, so quiet, and unfortunately, because of this, the more people we have, and India is a, very, very crowded nation, the more the leopard is the one that suffers. So for every single tiger death, there are at least 5 leopard deaths. I mean, I think we've, my organization has actually investigated something like nearly 5,000 leopard poaching cases, not just death. So, and most of them are just due to this fear and this, and they tend to kill children. They tend to kill, people's animals. So that they're considered a very, very serious threat, more so than the tiger.
I would like to add to that a bit on the density, because the person who asked the question mentioned that with tiger conservation, leopards are being pushed out. From my own studies in Bandipur and our current work in several tiger reserves of Maharashtra and Madhya Pradesh, the best tiger habitats are extremely good leopard habitats as well. It's a myth that tigers push leopards out. They are differently sized animals. Their behavior is different. So leopard, where there are tigers, behaves in a different way, and that behavioral difference allows the leopard to coexist with tigers. So the best tiger habitats of India, that is Kanha, Tadoba, Nagarhole, Bandipur, are the best leopard habitats as well. The density of leopards inside those parks is higher. They're higher than that of the tiger. Now, like Belinda said, leopards are commensal with humans, and this is not now. If you read stories written by the hunters of the past, there were leopards that were causing more problems to people than tigers. At that point, forests were very extensive. Because they are small-bodied, they can survive on small prey. And because in the poorest of poor villages, where they cannot even afford a cow or a buffalo, they can have poultry, they can have pigs, and they can have goats and sheep. And dogs, don't forget dogs and cats. So leopards are so highly adaptable that they are able to survive on small prey. Because of that, their interaction with people, because all these animals that I mentioned are commensal with human beings. So if human being population goes up, then dog population goes up, then sheep population goes up, whatever. So leopard population in the around human habitats can be sustained. Another big thing that is happening in India, in fact, and I would say I don't have enough figures, but from whatever I have spoken with communities and all that there were several places in India where the traditional farming has been replaced by sugarcane. Leopard population has actually gone up. So traditionally that area was not a strong leopard area, but because of this, the dams and the irrigation facilities, those areas got converted from groundnut to sugarcane. And mind you, sugarcane is like a fast food center, as I've already mentioned. So the population has gone up in some of these areas. And as Belinda said, of course, leopards are small. It's very easy to hide body parts of leopards, to carry leopards and the trafficked body parts of leopards. Compared to tigers, tigers can be 3 to 4 times larger than a leopard. And so what we know that there are leopards in a lot of areas, and there are some figures which I would not say are scientific, but they say there are more than 10,000 leopards in India. However, that population is under much severe threat from poachers and hunters than tigers are, because these animals can survive in a place like Bombay. It's very easy. If I have a farmhouse close to the Sanjay Gandhi National Park, I would have a resident leopard who uses my part of my farmhouse as his territory, home range rather. So it is very easy to eliminate these animals. Tigers therefore are used as indicator species because tigers don't tolerate human interference so much as leopards do. So we must understand that yes, conservation and tiger conservation has helped leopard conservation. So it's a myth that tiger conservation is only talking about tigers. It is talking about the leopards as well. And from our study, we can share a lot of data sets with you of all the camera trapping that has happened in tiger reserve, that they have very good population of leopards just because there are tigers. They are very elusive and you don't see them on the road like you will see them in parks where there are no tigers. So that's the only, it's an illusion created because of the tigers there. So that's something that I want to bring up here.
Yeah, we're actually almost gloriously out of time. However, I'm going to end with, saying that both of your passion is really contagious and your optimism as well. So what keeps you so optimistic in even these bleak times, if you could just end on that?
Gosh, I'm just a very optimistic person, and despite all the evidence to the contrary, I wake up every morning with a smile on my face, and I cuddle my dogs, and I think, yay! So I believe that somehow, it may be due to COVID-19, it may be due to climate change, but I believe that the powers that be, because as Anish said, the government is so important. I mean, not one enforcement case can be done by anybody else but government authorities, etc. So I think these two very powerful things that are happening, affecting all our lives, will affect, I hope, the thinking and policies of the future of India.
I am optimistic because I see people like Belinda, whose writings I have read when I was a kid. I interact with people like Ullas Karant. I interact with Raghu, who's a dear friend and who has fought and actually been in the eye of the storm. And yet, I see a lot of optimism in the eyes of a Bittu Sehgal. And so that is what gives me optimism, because these people have seen the worst phases. And the tiger conservation was actually has evolved over years. I was around, but I was not playing any role at that point in time. So there is huge amount of optimism because of people who have spent their lifetime, and they are not idiots. They do because they are optimistic. They are not acting. They feel sad. They will shed tears, but they wake up next morning and they are at it. And a lot of my optimism comes from the next generation as well. As you mentioned, I was part of the team that started Kids for Tigers in 2000. It stopped. I mean, it works in a very small way now, but it worked for almost, it ran for 18 years, 19 years. Belinda, you remember we had pulled you in also.
Yes.
Fateh Singh, and all these guys, we cannot forget them. So, and the children. So when I look at a child, and I am called Captain Hook in my building. So there are 3 buildings with 16 stories, and kids, when I come in, they call me Captain Hook. And if I tell them, if I have rescued a snake, and I ask them if they want to join me when we release the snake somewhere, everybody is really willing to. There is so much of optimism in the eyes of the children. However, their optimism is non-scientific. They by nature are optimistic. My optimism comes from the science I do, from the past I see, and those children, because I cannot let down those children, because they are inheriting this world. And this is a cliched statement, but most of us who do work out there, including Beverly and Derek and all of those people who are listening to me, we do what we do because whether we call it tiger conservation, we call it elephant conservation, we call it river conservation, we are trying to make sure that human beings also have a better life when we move on. So we definitely, and I think till the last tiger remains, I will be optimistic.
Thank you both so much for your contagious optimism and your passion, and for sharing your time with us. I think I've taken a little bit of advantage of the time you've given me over here, but thank you so much, and for celebrating Tiger Day with us and with Sunaparanta. But until then, we'll have to make do with this. Thank you again so much, and thank you.
Thank you everybody for
Thank you, Belinda.
Okay.
Thank you, Isheta. Wonderfully conducted.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Belinda, and thank you.
Bye.